Hello everyone, our guest here today is Miss Kavita Krishnan. She is the Secretary of the All India Progressive Women's Association, or the AIPWA, which is an organization known for being a voice of resistance against feudal oppression of women and state oppression of women. It is one of the foremost organizations which works on women workers, agricultural laborers, and all other sections of the poor in rural and urban India. Ms. Krishnan has been a student activist herself and is the editor of Liberation, which is a monthly publication. Welcome, Ms. Krishnan, and thank you for speaking to us today. Can you tell us a little about your journey as a social activist in the area of women's empowerment and women's movement in India?
Actually, I was a student doing my graduation in the early 90s in Bombay, and at that time I was not actively in any organization or anything like that, but I was drawn to the need to resist certain forms of what I felt were infringements on civil liberties, and especially liberties as a woman. And that happened during that time when the Babri Masjid had been demolished, and there was tremendous communal violence targeting minorities in Bombay, which was in Mumbai, which was called Bombay at that time. And the forces that were doing that were also painting a picture of the Hindu Rashtra in a way in which the position of women in it was very central, and they were defining the limits to which Indian women must keep themselves, so-called Indian women's limits. And that was something which was very, very threatening and very scary to me as a young woman at that time. And so since those days I was sort of looking for some way in which to be able to offer an organized resistance to what looked like the specter of fascism. And so when I later came as in my MA to the Jawaharlal Nehru University, then I became involved with the All India Students Association, the AISA, and became a student activist and a member of, I was elected to the union in those days. And, that was an organization which was a radical left organization, which successfully defeated the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, and in those days, which was the Hindu right-wing kind of mobilization platform for students in those days. So it defeated the ABVP in elections, and it was and the AISA was attractive as a platform because it was one of the left organizations which was also articulating very strongly an agenda of women's liberation on the campus as well as outside. So it was very, very active on that front as well. And many of its leading activists were women, and so I was drawn in very easily to that. Subsequently, I'm not a social activist in that sense. I am a political activist, and I'm right now a member of the Politburo of the CPIML, Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist. And it's in that capacity, in a sense, that I feel that I intervene with a Marxist perspective in the women's movement as well as in the general democratic movement. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any particular vision or any commitments that drive you every day for your work?
I think, I'm not sure how to define it in very short terms, but I'll have a try. See, the way I feel it is that there's this poem by Gorakh Pandey, who was a poet and founder of the Jan Sanskriti Manch, and he has this poem where he talks about you look at a woman's eyes full of pain and anguish and anger, and it's just a very short poem, and it just says कि ये आँखें तुम्हारी तकलीफ का उमड़ता हुआ समंदर. Then he says इस दुनिया को जल्द से जल्द बदल देना चाहिए. You have to change the world as soon as possible. So there's that sense of urgency, which comes, I think, from the sense that the kinds of injustices which are there, all right, and they are injustices which are linked, deeply interlinked with each other. It's very difficult to say that this is one particular issue on which I feel something and not on everything else, because all of it is so closely interlinked. So the issues of class and caste and gender oppression in the society in which we live is something very, very, very deeply disturbing. And so it's with a sense of urgency that we have to be fighting it. I don't think any of us who is part of this movement has any illusion that we can sort of change it overnight. But the sense of living in this society, enjoying some of its privileges without fighting back seems intolerable. And I think that is the sense which kind of, doesn't allow me to keep sitting in one place for too long. Yeah.
Taking from what you've just said, since you've been a voice in the anti-rape movement in Delhi, do you think that as a movement, it has been able to achieve the basic goals that it had tried to achieve in terms of stringent legislations to punish offenders? That basic goal of the movement, has it been able to achieve it in any way?
So this is something I think those of us who were in the thick of the movement have been trying to work out and think about and reflect upon, because in terms of the movement itself was it was a very broad affair in which there were all sorts of trends, and so it's difficult to define that these were a specific set of goals and you can't kind of tick off what was achieved and what was not. But I think that generally the sense of urgency that people felt protesting when they were asking for Bekhof Azadi for women, all right, which meant that freedom without fear. How close are we, how much have we changed in that direction? If one looks back at that, then I would say that if you look at the response of the government and what we got from there, I think that response is hugely disappointing. I won't even say disappointing, because I don't think any of us had too many illusions about what we would achieve there. But I'm just saying that there, if you measure it by that standard, it's been really abysmal. Because yes, some changes in the law were achieved, and they were important and very necessary changes, landmark changes. But they were changes which the women's movement has been asking for decades. All right, some of those changes are changes which were being asked for in the 1980s, since the Mathura rape case. So some of those changes, if they've come about now, they were long overdue. And in that sense, it's very much because of this very remarkable people's movement that it could be achieved even 30 years late. But even in the course of this movement, there was so many things which could not be achieved. All right. For instance, some of the key demands of the movement, even regarding the legal changes, never mind the rest, just legal changes, are yet to be achieved. For instance, India's rape laws still use phrases like outraging modesty, which is something the women's movement has resented and resisted for so long, saying don't define the hurt done to us in terms of sexual violence, in terms of our modesty. Define the crime, don't define our character, don't define it in terms of our character, because that puts an unfair burden on women when they're in court, having to prove something. Then the other thing is, of course, the question of recognition of rape in all circumstances. So marital rape is something it's intolerable that is still not accepted. Then the amendments to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. See, I think I look at this in two ways. One is that, of course, we didn't manage to achieve the government changing this act or even amending it mildly, let alone scrapping it. But the very fact, I feel, that the Justice Verma report recommended that it should be amended and that it should be reviewed, and that it is a factor in encouraging and patronizing rapes by the armed forces in conflict areas in the country. That is something which I really think it was this people's movement and the women's movement which achieved. Their having said that. Why do I say that? Because Justice Verma himself, with all respect to him, to the late Justice Verma himself, one must remember, was the judge who was heading the bench in the Supreme Court, which upheld the Armed Forces Special Powers Act when the NP, DHR people had gone to court against the AFSPA. Justice Verma upheld AFSPA. Now, the same Justice Verma, during this movement, because this movement did not relegate AFSPA to the background, it raised it, boldly right up front and said that if we are fighting rape, then, and if you're fighting rape culture, the culture that justifies and makes space for rape, AIPWA is very much part of that rape culture and it has to go. It said that, and that's therefore when Justice Verma met with women who have suffered, have come up against a wall in their fight for justice against rape by the armed forces, then he, the same judge, actually here recommended that no, I am forced to say that AIPWA, at least, I mean, even if one says that an army officer can claim he shot somebody in the course of his duty, but he can't claim to have raped somebody in the course of his duty, and so it cannot be used as a shield for rape. And army officers accused of rape must be tried in a civil court of law. I think this was a remarkable achievement of the movement. So I think I make a difference between the movement's achievements in terms of what they got, in terms of legal changes and so on, and responses from the government, and the achievement, the very remarkable achievement of the movement in terms of broadening the space for democratic discourse. All right, because, and why I say that is because I think the movement could have remained restricted to this particular case, or to the question of rape defined in a very narrow way, saying, all right, we want rapists to be punished. But it didn't. It actually expanded that to challenge rape culture. Rape culture meaning the culture of blaming women for rape. From day one, that wasn't just because of us. Spontaneously, people started raising protests against rape culture. And then when we also interacted with them and showed them rape culture in other contexts, how Dalit women are raped, how women are raped in conflict areas, how women are raped in army custody or police custody, they responded. So we could raise the questions of Kunan Poshpora or Thangjam Manorama or Soni Sori in Chhattisgarh. All of that we could raise it. And I'll just wrap this point up by saying that, look, for me the high point of this movement was that, all right, at India Gate there were 10,000 people. Wonderful. Now India Gate happened in December 21st or so, around that time. All right. On later near in January 26th, that's India's Republic Day. Now Republic Day is a day when certain things are just supposed to be sacred cows. You're not supposed to protest on that day. You're not supposed to be active citizens. You're supposed to be passive spectators to a military spectacle. Well, this time people said we don't want to do that. And this came from the movement. We were hesitant. We were not sure whether it's possible to do a march on 26 January. But people said, no, we must. So we said, let's reclaim the Republic. We had a people's parade, a freedom parade on that day. And it was remarkable that there, if one had around 2,500, 3,000 people marching, and those people were ordinary citizens of Delhi, students of Delhi who've come out for the first time, marching alongside students from Kashmir or the Northeast who were saying, your Republic rapes where we live. All right. The rape is happening in the name of the Republic. And then you had other, these Delhi students and Delhi people saying, we don't want certain rapes to be justified in the name of protecting us. We don't want rapes in the name of the Republic. This was, I think, something which was a very, very remarkable achievement, and something which changed, which is a landmark in the history of protest in Delhi. So I think that in terms of broadening the scope of that protest, we could have had that kind of protest earlier, but it would have been maybe 250, 300 people. So if one had 3,000 people instead, then I think that that was an achievement for the movement, a very remarkable achievement. Yeah.
In your long career, what is the one thing that you have learnt about women and activism in India today? What is the one thing, that one lesson or whatever you call it, something that you've learnt about the women's movement in India today? And what are the challenges to this, and how do you wish to respond to the challenges?
Yeah, I think that, for me, the reason why I am with, this is a sort of personal answer, since it seems to be a personal question, but the reason why I am with the AIPWA, all right, is somewhat linked with the question you're asking, with the answer to that question, all right. Because for me, see, it's always possible to have a women's organization or a women's movement as a group of people who are already convinced, who are agreed on certain things, and who are, who know exactly where they are going, and they are ideologically of a kind. All right, so you can have a small group of people who are feminists, who are like that, and who can, they also can contribute very remarkably, and they have done so. But for me, the challenge really goes beyond that. It really goes to intervene in changing the common sense, all right, common sense in the sense that Gramsci or Lenin understood it, all right, changing the common sense of people about society, all right, about the way women are perceived, about the way caste is perceived. How does one go and change the way rape is perceived or women are perceived? So changing that means that it's not enough for people to feel rape is a bad thing. Everybody will say that. But the point is that in some context they will start feeling, oh, but she asked to be raped. Oh, but why was she dressed like that? Why was she out at that time? And this is not just, ill-educated people who do this. People in very high places do it. Rape culture is rampant everywhere across the globe, all right. So how does one change that? For that you have to intervene very actively in the way the mass of people think. And for me the challenge, and this movement really highlighted how that happens. Because in this movement there were so many trends working, all right. For one thing, there was a spontaneous demand for death penalty. Let's just take that. Okay, death penalty for rape became a kind of rallying cry for many people. So for those like me who really felt that the question of rape culture being the target was being sidelined by the question of what are the kinds of punishment we can give to rapists? Should we castrate them? Should we hang them? Should we do what? Should we, lynch mob them? What should we do? Was something that was pushing out these other aspects of the movement, which were also there spontaneously. It's not like it was just them versus us special people, but it was, within the mass of the movement, there were these two trends. So we entered in there, we talked to people. We didn't say, oh, death penalty is a terrible demand, and, we just went in there and talked to people and talked to them about the consequences of asking for death penalty for rape. And we did manage to persuade many of them that in fact this is this is a red herring. This is something which is allowing people in power to get away with things. Because everybody can say, oh, we want death penalty for rape. We've given you death penalty for rape, be happy with it. Whereas the real question of how do you convict somebody for rape if your entire judicial system, the way your laws are framed, the way your police functions, the way the medical examination is conducted, each of those things is actually there to justify rape and protect the rapist, then how are you going to convict, never mind what punishment you'll give? So we actually managed to change the way a lot of people thought about that. And so we, I think of that as one of the things which came about because we didn't remain content with being a small group of convinced people, okay, saying, all right, we stand for these things and we will try and attract a few more convinced people to us. Rather, we said, no, there is something potentially radical in the thinking of everybody, including the thinking of those who may think very protectionist thoughts about women, very patriarchal thoughts otherwise about women. But perhaps at this juncture there is some crack somewhere, some spark somewhere. So we have to intervene there and make that spark into a fire. And that is something which I think is a challenge for the movement as a whole every day. It's not just during such a big mass movement that one tries for this, but that one is doing it all the time. So even in my own organization or in my own movement, I think that this is a movement which is learning, which draws into it the mass of women and accepts that perhaps many of those women may not initially, hold with. It's not as though the minute they join the movement, they've suddenly become, 24 karat, feminist, and they think in a certain way. But possibly they've embarked upon a journey, which is a journey in which all of us are there, and we are changing in the course of that. So we change ourselves in the course of that, and we change, public common sense in the course of that. And that is an uncertain but sort of exciting journey. And for me, that is the real challenge. Yeah.
Do you think social activism of any sort can be taught, like in a classroom or taught through teaching, generally passing on information? Do you think social activism can be taught to the youth today?
No and yes. Okay, no in the sense that I don't think you can have a curriculum for it. I don't think you can have, you do have institutes for social work and so on and so forth, but I don't think you can have a curriculum for social activism or whatever. You can't, all right. And I don't think it's something which can specifically be imparted in a student-teacher kind of way. But I do think that our education has to be such that it should be something that helps to create a situation where questions can be asked, all right, where people learn to be equipped to pose the questions in their mind and be equipped to seek answers for them. That kind of analytical ability is not only something which is an academic ability. Of course, it's crucial for academic worth as well. But it's also essential because, it's also how you connect with society, whereby you don't accept the status quo and you try to ask the right questions and try and seek the right answers. So I think for me, the question of what happens in a classroom and what happens in the, for me, my experience in JNU is a good instance of that. Because I won't say all my classes were exhilarating and, oh, JNU was this wonderful place where the teachers taught me to be radical. No, I don't think, far from that, all right. But I think some of those classes, yes, some of those classrooms were places where we may not all have agreed on something, and those teachers and I may have had severe disagreements on many things politically and ideologically, but there were places where a lot of questioning happened, where the class of 2 hours would stretch on for 5 hours, and there would be heated debates and people actually trying to work out how to defend a particular position. So I think that was something which flowed into my social activism, but also that much of the learning happened outside the classroom, whereby JNU was a place where there was a lot of student activism, and that was something which student activism not only within the campus but linking up with outside the campus, and that was something which was truly the biggest contributor not only to one's growth as an activist but also one's growth academically and in terms of theoretically and all of that. I wish that we had more places like that. I'm not one of those who's nostalgic about JNU and says, oh, JNU is this little hothouse which we have to keep like that. Rather, I wish that each of our colleges could be like that. It pains me to see colleges in Delhi University, for instance, where a student organization cannot get permission to hold a public meeting. They can't get a classroom to hold a public meeting in. They can't get a public space to hold a public meeting in, without all sorts of red tape, without being told, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, and you're not allowed to do that. So I think the places where, you're not allowed to do politics or social activism, and it's becoming more and more so, all right, they're trying to do the change, even the little places that they used to exist like JNU, but in places like Delhi University, it's so apparent now. So that's really, really painful, because I think that this is the place where young people, if you don't create the kind of atmosphere where they can ask and do exactly what they please, they may not always do things you like, all right. They may do left activism or they may do anything else. I mean, they may do right-wing activism, they may do anything. The point is, if you're not giving the space for people to do the kind of activism they would like to and ask the kind of questions they would like to, there is going to be no growth there. It doesn't matter how wonderful you claim your classroom is. And even that's actually being proved otherwise, because even academically, it's very, very clear that, the kind of, even our academic spaces are getting affected by the fact that there's a shrinking democratic space. It's becoming more and more apparent, yeah.
Okay, how, as an activist, how do you balance your life as an activist with your other lives, all other aspects of your life?
I don't I don't have much of another life. Yeah, I mean, it's become you're talking to me in my office. I live here almost all the time, and much of the time night and day, this is what we do. But it's just that I don't think of it as being, I more or less, this is the life that I lead. And everything, watching a movie or spending time with friends happens in the course of all of this, as part of this. And it usually happens, somehow in an ad hoc way during the movement and everything. But it's just that I really feel strange when people talk about activists as though they are people who've sacrificed some other life. I feel like, no, if I was doing some 9 to 5 job somewhere, that would be terrible. That would be such a terrible sacrifice. This is something I enjoy doing. I love doing. Why should it ever be called, or talked about in terms of as though one has given up something else? Not at all. I think that, I'm so glad I didn't have to give this up in order to, kind of do something, do something else. So it's fun and I like it. Yeah.
What do you foresee about the future of women's movement in India in terms of the goals that it has set for itself and in terms of the achievements that it has yet to make?
Well, I think that, I've been thinking recently to see the women's movement in India has had, as I said, it's had very remarkable achievements. It has changed the way in which many things, including other, progressive political movements, the way they think, the way they respond, that has been positively affected by the women's movement. But I think that there's a question which the women's movement needs to think about in terms of not only India, but even across the world. I think that this is something we need to think about, which is that I think the way in which the neoliberal policies are coming are changing the ways in which, they're changing the ways in which we all have to reconceptualize our movements. All right. So for me, I think that the way I see it is that the question of how to conceptualize women's reproductive labor, all right, that has to find sort of a more central place in the way we conceptualize the women's movement as well. In terms of questions like demands like child care or health care, all right, for women, for everybody, but because these are questions that affect women's lives. Okay, things that make it possible for women to access the public space, all right, without having to without having to have an unfair bargain in the domestic space is something which means that we have to challenge the very fact of domestic labor being a women's job. And we also have to then say it's not enough to say, oh, husband and wife should share and do. It's really the question of making it a society's job, which means that the state has to take responsibility for that. And that is becoming more and more important at a time when there are cuts in subsidies, when social sector is being sidelined, all right, and corporates are getting all our budgetary funds while necessary social sectors are facing cuts, like health is being privatized. Okay, child care is nowhere on the agenda in India. All these are things we're going to have to think about. And there I think that the question of working women workers, all right, that has to find really center stage and central space. Because if we conceptualize, I think about this Bekhof Azadi slogan, for instance. And I think that, of course it's the Azadi, it's the freedom for all of us to be able to access the public space without having to fear sexual violence, and without having to be told that you are provoking sexual violence by just being out there dressed in a particular way or with someone or without someone or whatever. That's, of course, that's challenging rape culture. But it's also about the fact that a woman in India or Bangladesh, okay, should have to be able to go to her workplace and work there without feeling that the building may collapse any minute or she'll be caught in a fire. All right. Without feeling that when she's at work, she doesn't know what's happening to her children. What are her children doing? Why? I mean, these are also equally the questions, they're central questions to, and these questions, when we pose them, make a demand on the state. They make a demand on the state's budgets, the state's allocation, the state's distribution. And I think that is something we need to work on, how to do that even more. So, we have to, that goes for everything. For instance, we're going to start this time with working on some of the things the Verma committee recommended and saying that, look, if the government is announcing some Nirbhaya fund, then it isn't enough to have some 1,000 crore seed fund and say, oh, Nirbhaya fund, and we don't know what it's for and what it's going to do. But it's there, we've announced it, and we can, claim it in our next election manifesto. Won't do. We're going to say that in that case, what you gave Nirbhaya, what you were forced to give Nirbhaya of Delhi, that one Nirbhaya of Delhi 16 December, you were forced to give her free medical care because of the movement's pressure, because you were in the eye of the storm. If you were forced to do that, then why can't you do that for every Nirbhaya who is a rape survivor or an acid attack survivor? And not only the medical costs, but the costs of rebuilding their lives. If we are going to say that their lives are of full value, even after rape, there is life and there is full life after rape. If that is the case, then we have to make sure that quality of life is the same or enhanced after the thing of rape. So you have to ensure that if they require education, jobs, rehabilitation, if the family is forced to relocate because of certain kinds of medical care being available somewhere, or whatever the reasons are, then those things have to be made available, and they have to be made available at state cost. All right, and this should be for every acid attack survivor, every rape survivor. We're starting with that. That's what I mean. I think the women's movement has to go to the point where you are making a demand on the state's distribution and its allocation and its priorities. Yeah.
And that is the main goal. Thank you so much, Ms. Krishnan. That was Kavita Krishnan, and we are very, very grateful to her for giving us her time. Thank you so much for listening in.